A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Vishnupriya Raghavan. I head products and solutions at StackRoot. On behalf of NIIT Institute of Finance, Banking and Insurance and NIIT StackRoot, I take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to this session on accelerating the BFSI digital transformation, APIs, platforms, and ecosystems. A short introduction about NIIT IFBI and StackRoot. NIIT IFBI was set up in 2006 to cater to skilled workforce requirement of the BFSI sector in India. In its new avatar, NIIT IFBI is digital. It enables BFSI workforce digitally, prepares future-ready professionals with domain, data, and digital skills. NIIT StackRoot, established in 2015, runs deep tech programs for professionals aspiring to grow in their tech leadership careers. As digital transformation partner, StackRoot works with several large IT organizations, product engineering organizations, GICs for transformative programs that includes bespoke learning interventions in data science, analytics, AI, cybersecurity, and many more, and deep skilling programs in full stack development. It's an absolute pleasure to host this webinar, Accelerating the BFSI Digital Transformation, APIs, platforms, and ecosystem with industry stalwarts that we have with us today. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our guests for today, Bijit Bhaskar, Head Digital Channels and Partnerships at ICICI. Bijit, a very, very warm welcome from all of us. A very good afternoon. Bijit leads several initiatives at ICICI, includes digital channels, digital lending, and building digital partnerships for ICICI. Bijit has had a very long tenure with ICICI Bank. He has held important portfolios in retail liabilities. He has managed complex business phases of high growth, maturity, and reorganizing business. He leads digital partnerships with fintech startups and e-commerce entities. Most importantly, Bijit runs the mobile banking app and the internet banking platform for ICICI. Bijit, a very warm welcome once again. With him, we have Jaya Janardhanan. Thanks, Bijit. With him, we have Jaya Janardhanan, COO of Indostar Capital Finance. Jaya brings with her extensive experience directing and delivering strategic projects, blending automation and centralization for scalability and productivity of the banking sector. Previously, she was a COO at Ujjivan Small Finance Bank. Jaya has governed large-scale multi-product and multi-channel techno-enabled operations for ops risk management. Jaya, thank you for being here today. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to participate in this.
Thank you. And with our guest today is Bimaljit Bhasin, President, Skills and Careers Business, NIIT Limited. Bimal drives NIIT's India business that focuses on providing career-related learning and talent development programs to individuals and organizations in India. Bimal brings with him a diverse career experience about more than 2 decades now that spans leadership roles, focused on building, scaling, and transforming businesses. In his earlier role with Manipal Global, Bimal played a very significant role in establishing the organization as a leading talent development partner for the BFSI industry. We have 3 well-experienced professionals, passionate about BFSI, enthusiastic about sharing their insights on how APIs are truly changing the landscape of banking and accelerating the digital transformation in BFSI. APIs are literally everywhere, whether or not people know it or expect it. Now, as technology advances, we as consumers, we are so accustomed to having technology run in the background, and most often we are ignorant to the API architecture that's behind it at all. Every time there is a share button on social media, hey, there is an API. Every time we use an application that imports our friends and contacts, hey, there is another API. There are plenty of examples of APIs touted for bringing in innovation. We all know about Netflix APIs, allow them to reach customers on platforms, continuously enhance user experience through recommendations. McDonald's extended their customer experience through Mac delivery thanks to the Ubers unbundling their transportation services. McDonald's was able to reach a new market in food delivery, integrating with McDonald's through APIs. Of course, not to forget Facebook, not to forget Spotify. They would not be there where they are today without an API. Now, as a person who has been designing, developing, delivering programs, I've always been intrigued, especially the programs that we do for mid to senior professionals. I've always been intrigued by a lot of these emerging technology trends, and most importantly, being very curious about the Schumpeter's theory of creative destruction. Across industries, I think the recent growth of the API economy bears hallmarks of Schumpeter's enduring term creative destruction. Whether it is retail, advertising, telecom, leisure, hospitality, I think age-old models, operating models have been broken, services have been reinvented, the scope of the market has rapidly widened, the incumbent businesses have really been thrown upon themselves a big challenge. There are new competitive pressures. As Schumpeter said, the process of creating anything new does not go forward without sweeping away the pre-existing order. So what about banking? Has really a new era emerged with API technologies? Has this redefined banking? Is this really making banks near invisible? Is an API strategy a must for all the banks? Let's now hear it from Bimal, Jaya, and Bijit. Over to Bimal. Thank you all for joining today. Let's sit back. Please mute yourselves. Over to Bimal now as he pounds his questions with pounds Jaya and Vijit with his questions. He will open the floor for all of us to ask questions at the end, and we could unmute ourselves. Thank you all again. Over to Bimal.
No, so I'm here to learn from Jay and Vijit. They are industry veterans, and I'm keen to learn from them. You know, Jaya, let me start with you. And clearly, like Priya said, there is lots happening. Financial services, BFSI, the industry has always been at the forefront of technology adoption. In fact, if you look at it from the other perspective, which is the perspective of technology companies, BFSI has always been one leading sector. It's for, if you talk to any technology company, BFSI would always be amongst the top 2 or 3 verticals for most of the technology companies. So, you know, financial services, banking has always been way ahead in terms of technology adoption. And obviously, a lot of things has accelerated this journey in the past, including the advent of API and like Priya said, many things which are being spoken, open banking, invisible bank, and many other aspects. And of course, like it has happened in many other industries, COVID has accelerated this journey further. But let me understand from you, Jaya, you know, this entire ecosystem, and help us demystify this from the perspective of who we all serve, which is really the customer, right? And I'll be happy to hear from you as to how are APIs helping organizations such as yours to create greater value for customers. I think that's really what all of these technologies eventually leveraged at. So happy to hear from you. And specifically, if you can touch upon, you know, one of the use cases that most customers use, which is the payments as a use case. So help us understand how APIs and platforms are helping create customer value, specifically from the perspective of payments.
Thank you, Bimal. I think, as you rightly said, you know, the entire landscape of banking has undergone a huge change from a very conventional banking to, you know, to a new age banking, with a public sector banking to a private sector banking to a payments bank to a, you know, the small finance bank. The entire range of banking is changing. It's the way they serve our customers. So we also go from a very old concept saying that, you know, moving from a seller's market to a buyer's market. So that's where we are arriving at. Today, the customer has a choice. It's not the banker who has a choice. It's a customer who has a choice as to which bank he will choose and why would he choose a bank. So that's where the first, you know, the difference lies, and that's where the nature of banking has changed from where it used to be to where it is now. Now, when we speak about APIs, yeah, you rightly mentioned it's actually a huge word which is now floating everywhere, and everybody thinks it's a very complicated. Actually, without even knowing much, today everything that you touch and feel, there is an API that happens in the system, knowingly or unknowingly. In the similar manner, when it comes to banking, the traditional model of having a location, and to have X and Y desk in the branches, and to serve the customers, are all moving away to one. Is, as you rightly said, COVID has actually accelerated the changes that has come about. But having said that, the way customers are looking at, sorry, there's too much of noise in between. The what happens typically in the entire process is that the customer demands what he wants now. It's typically the customer chooses his bank, and he chooses a bank for a number of reasons. And while product services all remains at the topmost of the priority, one of the critical reasons why I leave or choose a bank, or I stay with a bank, or I change my bank, is because of the service and the speed in which I get served by a particular bank. Now, when we come about APIs, okay, why do we take APIs? Why is it necessary? APIs have actually changed the way in which we serve our customers, in which our cost of acquisition of the customers has, the amount we pay to acquire a customer, the amount we pay to serve a customer. There is a huge reduction in the cost per acquisition of a customer, per service cost of a customer, per transaction cost of a customer. The more we actually, as a bank, we get involved in using APIs to serve our customers, the more we'll be able to give the customers at a much, much lower cost a service or a product than used to be in the past. Coming back to the point of payments, okay, now when we talk about payments, one of the biggest example that we can give in terms of payment for an API is your UPI. UPI actually is the word that's now the whole industry, the whole ecosystem, the whole transaction system, the whole payment system is talking about. That's changed the way actually you make a payment sitting at your desk, at your home, and you can make entire payments through UPI. Now, UPI works solely on APIs, because the way, so for example, you can have a UPI handle. You can have an UPI handle of, let's say, of an ICICI bank, but you can actually debit your account of HDFC and make a payment to a Punjab National Bank. So it doesn't really matter which handle of an UPI you hold. You can do transaction between any bank. That's because the ease of which the APIs talk to each of these banking channels, talk to the financial systems of all these banks, and make the transaction flow through easily. So that's the way actually how the UPI channel works. And I mean, everybody who's on this call, everybody who knows about it knows that UPI is here to stay, and is here to change the way how transaction banking is going to happen in the future. So it's not just about UPI. For example, every customer who is now of a bank, for example, I hold an account with ICICI Bank. I would like to do my payments to my entire my telecom payments, my bill payments. I want to do a monthly payment to some other bank. All these work through the API model, and the way the structure of the system is built in. So so first and foremost, I think we all need to kind of get this very strongly into our head, stating that APIs are here to stay. APIs is the way forward. If you can't adopt it, you just perish, because that's the way that the technology, the organizations which use, adapt, and make full advantage of it will only prosper. And that's the way we have to look forward. So BFSI segment, if you really go to see, while we talk about BFSI segment, and we talk about the adaptability of these in the BFSI segment, it will happen. It's only a matter of how the change and all organizations take it to make it happen faster. Some run fast, some are slow, but some or the other, they just kind of will catch up, and it will become the way or how the ecosystem will work. So I hope I've answered your question, Bimal, with respect.
No, yeah, we'll keep coming back to you, Jaya, for more.
Sure.
But we're just happy to get you in, and also share your opening comments. And and then cover the other aspects, which is, while Jaya talked about payments, how do you see APIs playing a very large use case in again delivering value to customers from the other perspective, which is say lending or investments. Vijay?
Yeah. So, at least within a few of us, there is this whole discussion that happens when we talk about API. We say that API is nothing but the 2-minute Maggie noodle which came many years ago. It's all about instant and now, right? So therefore, it's just that in an individual world, you wanted many things to happen. The ecosystem did not develop, but today, as digital is actually catching up, the consumer preferences are changing, and as consumer preferences are changing, they are saying that I'm not going to behave the way I behaved in the past. So earlier, if you could do a file protocol was an accepted protocol, and everybody thought that that was a huge change in technology. But today they're saying that sorry, it's outdated. Even 15 minutes of a runtime is too late. We want to do everything here and now. Now, why is this also happening? Is I think this is also coming off the FMCG world, because actually sachet products are being made. People are saying that I need to use it only for making that particular aspect. It is no longer a situation where a bank will say that no, either you take it or leave it, because these are the minimum ticket sizes, these are the minimum ways in which you need to transact. Customers are saying, sorry, there are better ways for me to do it, and I will do it the way I want. So as technology is evolving, as more and more technology players are actually trying to influence every sphere, it is not just about banking, you will actually find that customer preferences change. And I think that's exactly what is happening. And this whole thing is today being driven by this whole thing called API, right? So I think if you ask me, the biggest use case to best understand it is, I think, Google Maps. I think if you ask Google Maps is the best example of an API the way I would see it. And we always think, that we would like to be Google Maps for the banking industry, because look at the number of businesses that Google Maps has spawned, right? There are so many use cases that have come out of it. So the question that we need to be asking, or for that matter, any future-looking organization needs to be asking, is that do you have the API platform which can actually help every part of the ecosystem, be it individuals, be it businesses, and can you also enable therefore commerce to happen by using all those APIs that you put out there? And it is from that perspective that if you look at our API stack, be it payments, be it lending, be it investments, be it account opening, we are saying that we have to play this game in every facet of it. So we have APIs for every particular transaction type that you can think of, and we are basically saying that I think a day has come when the customer says that he will do his transactions, or he will do his business the way he wants to do. If that is the way forward, then the only thing that you can do is that you have to be present in the path of his transaction. And the only way you can probably do that is with today's technology API. Tomorrow's technology could be, I don't know, blockchain, it could be whatever. But at least today that's the technology that is there, and that is the reason why you will find adoption happen. I mean, there are umpteen examples. I don't think today any new age company actually talks about any integration other than API integration. I think it's quite sad that some old corporates still say that they would like to do a host-to-host integration and things like that. But I think that percentage is just dwindling. So I think from that perspective, I think it is here to stay. I think most of the banks are adopting it, and I think there are a very good API stack which is out there in the market. And I think the response has been very good because all the consumers want it, and I think that's the way to go forward.
No, interesting, Vijay, and I think if there was one common word which was used the most in what Jaya shared and you shared is customer, right? And really how customer, like Jaya said, today customer chooses, what to bank, where to bank, and like you said, it is consumer who's selecting at every stage, and they are really dictating. But two aspects to this. Banking also has always been and continues to be, is a heavily regulated sector, right? I mean, there are regulations and there are compliances which banks have to adhere to and live in that ecosystem. But at the same point of time, clearly, like you're saying, customer today wants very different kind of products. So what I wanted to understand from you is, and Vijit, maybe you can come in, is that how has the digital economy and then the integration of APIs and platforms, how has this impacted the product innovation itself, or the kind of products that banks are today coming out with and putting it out there for customers to consume?
Yeah. So I think, as I said, one is the sachet products, right? I mean, very clearly your ability. If let's assume that you had to deliver a 25,000 rupee loan or a 50,000 rupee loan, or for that matter, even a 1 lakh rupee loan, in the old way of doing business, where somebody had to go meet, see what he's doing, analyze papers, etc., it would have been a non-viable proposition. So today, what is happening is that today, because of the fact that you have the ability to actually put out these products in a pure digital mode, and using APIs actually have the ability to underwrite not just in the old way of underwriting by analyzing balance sheets, but more from the perspective of understanding customer profile as well as cash flows. And these are both enabled only because of the fact that you have an API infrastructure. Once you have that, you have the ability actually to give the give these services to the customer. You mentioned about the regulatory environment, and I must certainly say that world over, there are so many delegations who come and meet us from across the world, and they all tell us two things largely. One is the fact that they're enamored by the entire UPI infrastructure that we've created, because it's out of the world. Actually, it's a world-class project. And the second thing that they keep saying is that we've got a very progressive regulator. So, for example, it could be a sandbox, it could be the type of solutions that they come up, and it is not that it's free for all, right? So, for example, if you want to do a small ticket, you want to open a savings account, or you want to do a small ticket loan, or any of those things, the regulator actually has given us an option called an eKYC, by stating that you get the ball rolling, you get some of these products out there, and as he grows, as he evolves, and as it becomes more meaningful, you obviously need to figure out as to how do you do a high touch KYC. Now, for that also, actually today now, they're willing to experiment by the fact that we can do video KYC. But it's not that you open up everything one fine day and we say that that is the most progressive way to do it. I don't think that's the most progressive way to do it. We should obviously, because all of these things, there is also this whole digital maturity that we have of the customer. It's not necessary that everybody is at the same maturity level. I think once customers start adopting this, understand how these things work, you will actually find that then it needs to be open. So I think to that extent, I think the regulator has been very, very supportive. The regulator is very progressive by stating that you should do some of these things so that there is ease of customer convenience, and the banks therefore, riding on all of these products and regulations which are there, has now been able to therefore build products which can actually cater to those requirements. So today we have something called a pay later loan. We don't mind giving a loan as low as 5,000 rupees, and by stating that okay, you use it and you give it back in the next 45 days. Whom is it meant for? It's probably meant for a guy who starts his job. He probably doesn't have a credit history. He probably cannot get a large loan, but this helps him create this credit history, and his requirements are small for the time being, because he's using it for basic purposes. It could be, and once the salary comes, he's able to knock it off. Similarly, there are other consumer durable loans, which need to be purchased at that point of time. Now, at that point of time, you cannot be going to the bank by stating that I want to underwrite, I want a loan, I want a personal loan, etc. So how can you give it at the point of purchase? On what basis can you underwrite? So again, we use APIs to hit various bureaus, various other databases to actually try and see as to how those products can get built. So if you ask me sum and substance, I think the way the bank is, the banks are thinking, I think it's radically changing. And there are products that are getting built. Standard products remain. They are also more efficiently being delivered through APIs. But I think the sachets that get made for all of these products make it more inclusive, right? Therefore, now you suddenly have a whole new set of customers to whom you can give lending, because of the fact that you can give smaller loans. Otherwise, they were excluded because you could not give them a 3 lakh or a 5 lakh rupee loan. So from that perspective, similarly from a rural perspective, I'll give you a very interesting use case. I'm sure some of you must have read it in the paper. We started using satellite images to try and see as to what is happening in the farming space. Now suddenly you realize that okay, because of the fact that that based on satellite images, farming is happening, actually the crop is growing. You can actually at different points of time, you can actually start giving small loans for that particular purpose. Right? At some point of
Yeah.
time, it is to buy seed. At some point of time, it is for fertilizer. At some other point of time, it is for harvesting. So, and all of these things are because of the fact that you have these APIs, and there are different partners that we use for, for different services. Otherwise, we would have had to build probably all of these things. So these APIs are also helping us build partnerships, use some of those technology so that we don't have to build it completely, and in the process help a very unique product proposition, which therefore benefits the customer. I guess that's how it is actually helping.
No, this helps, Bijit and Jay. If I can come back to you and connect two things that you mentioned in your initial comments is one, like you said, that the cost of transaction, obviously, right? It's APIs, and given that a lot of transactions today are happening on the platform, the cost of transaction and also cost of acquisition of customer has come down significantly. But what it has also resulted in is that the touch points with customers have reduced, right? Because many of these transactions today happen over the platform with very little or almost no touch with the customer. And the other dimension to this is that, again, something that you alluded to is a customer decides, and pretty much today he has a choice to decide almost at an every transaction stage as to which is the player that he wants to do this particular transaction with. Now, in such an environment, right, and banking for ages has been built on building long-term relationship, bankers for life. How do you build long-term customer base and long-term customer engagement and connect?
So, Bibel, the underlying principle of a banking relationship in terms of connect with the customer, be with the customer, attend to his needs, still continues, and it will always be one of the topmost priority behind which a bank will always exist. The way how API has actually enabled it and made it much more significant and important in a bankers as well as in the customer's life is customers look at ease of transacting. Okay, we have gone are the days when you have to go to the bank and you have to meet a personal person sitting in front of you, have to talk to them, because nowadays people really don't want to do that, because the kind of even before pre-COVID also, you never had too many people who go to the bank because they want to meet someone. They just go to the bank because they have some work in the bank, right? And COVID has already made it more, has made things much more, a little more difficult, because obviously because of the circumstance in which we are. But does the demand from the customer reduce? No, he expects the same level of experience and service from a bank. The bank obviously builds on two: increase your customer, increase revenue, make sure that X customer is using most of the products of the customer. How do you do all this? How do you actually make sure that the customer sticks with you, or the so-called word, the stickiness of the customer with you? It's all because of how you make it easy for all the products to be enabled for a customer. Let me give an example. If I as a customer wants to wants to do e-commerce, I want to transact I want to make a payment, I want to do the utility payments, I want to make a e-commerce transaction, I want to do my normal banking transactions, I will always look at which is that app of the bank which will ease and make sure my entire process goes easy, smoothly, and there is no breaks in between. The ease of use of a particular app is what actually makes a customer stick with that particular bank, because then he knows that, okay, fine, this bank takes care of mine. Just like the way Bijit said, this loan which you get in minutes after you, if you want a loan, and if the basic details are given, they give you loan in a matter of minutes. How does that happen? That's because, and if I get money when I want it, I will definitely be loyal to that particular bank, because this helped me ease at that point of time when I wanted money. If I want, if I want to suddenly, make my family a nominee, or I want to add people, it's a use of how I'm able to bring them as my additional as a account holder in the system. The eKYC, which helps you to onboard the customer as an additional member easily. So these are some of the examples that I can give you, that where customer will stick to you, and that continues to be a priority for the banks and for the customer, but it's the way how you ease the transaction for the customer. I will always look at, do I have to have multiple hops before I do a transaction, or can I just press some 2-3 keys in my app and then I can go to the transaction? That's where people will actually say, okay, choose X app over Y app, choose X bank over Y bank. So therefore, every bank therefore will have to come into the race and say, how do I make life easy for my customer so that they're able to transact with me easily? Now, the other piece I wanted to kind of add when I heard Bijit speak and when you asked also was the transaction cost. Okay, now let me give you one example where there's been a huge paradigm shift in the way we do transaction. Earlier, cash has to be deposited in the branch. You can't even think about cash being deposited anywhere else, right? You have to go to the branch and deposit. Now, the way API has enabled this, if you actually, banks like the large banks where there's a lot of cash collection, but you don't have any of these, any of your branches in the rural setup, what happens is there are a lot of tie-ups that you do with multiple other players in the market, which actually enables you to take cash on behalf of the customer. But the moment the payment is done, there is an immediate revert that gets updated into the banking system that this customer has paid. So therefore, most of the time, these are used for the EMI payments of the customer, especially small banks where they don't have large network, but they have customers in the interior who needs to make payment. And in a scenario like COVID, where people can't travel to the bank or the bank staff can't go and collect cash, these outlets have actually helped you to bring in cash. This is how you bring a customer and a bank together. They don't see you, but they have made sure that the bank actually has helped you when he had to pay the money. He did not have to travel to the branch, but the bank made sure that it enabled it easily. So these are some of the cases when we talk about how you ease customer transaction and make it easy for the customers who transact with the bank. So banks always and of course APIs have only made it easier. The only point that I will again table it is that those who run faster make it easier, make it make sure that the customers stick around with them. Those who don't lose out in the game and give the customers to some other bank. So that's where we can make sure that both these both the bank as well as the customers, the loyalty factor is maintained.
Sure.
So let me just add a point there. Actually, it's a little counterintuitive. Generally we think that it is better that if the customer comes to a branch and there is a person-to-person interaction, you might just be able to do more because there is that touch and there is a relationship, etc. But actually, if you look at it, the number of times a customer will walk into the branch are far and few. But the number of digital footprints that a customer actually leaves if he is more active with you is far, far higher, to the extent that actually you can draw a much better pen picture of the customer if he is more digitally active than he is actually, a physical touch point active. And but generally the feeling is that if you meet a guy, you can actually understand better. But that may not always be true if you actually look at it from a digital perspective.
No, you're right, Bijit, and the kind of like you said, the footprint and the transaction that you can capture of the customer in terms of multiple of his how is he spending, what are the patterns, what transactions, etc., etc. So I think the footprint capturing itself has a huge benefit for the banks. But that again brings us to a very interesting perspective, Bijit, that for all of this to happen, right, the front end of the technology of banks and the back end of the technology has to talk very, very, it has to be very tightly integrated, right? And many of large banks have, huge legacy technology infrastructure, which, like I said, while there's been adoption happening at accelerated speed, but there is technology investment that banks have done over the years, and there is legacy infrastructure which rests with the bank. So how do you think has been the receptivity of the bank to modernize the entire technology infrastructure? And also, I mean, clearly there is a related aspect of all the cyber security and other threats which also comes in from the front end. So and how does that balance happen where there is digital transactions but there are threats, and there is modern technology but there is legacy technology? So how is this balance happening?
Yeah. So one thing, let me make it very clear. There is no balance as far as cyber technology security is concerned. That is utmost. There is no compromise there. Right? Whatever it takes, it takes. Cyber security is paramount because at the end of the day, banks run on trust and nothing else. Right? So
Yeah.
that's a given. So let's keep that out of the topic of discussion. You're right that there are legacy systems. You're right that it is not very easy to build some of these architecture when you actually build your systems in a particular manner. Because if your API has to work extremely well, you have to have microservices. And if you have to have microservices, then obviously you need to have a very different architecture than it was a couple of years back. And I think that's a journey which I think every bank is taking. I'll not name, but if you look at one of the largest PSU banks, the amount of money that they have spent to actually upgrade so that they can actually put up a completely new architecture and provide all types of APIs so that they can build their app in the most seamless manner is actually reflecting the change that is happening in the banking industry and the acceptance of the fact that this is the new way to bank and therefore you need to spend on the technology if you have to be relevant. I think all banks are doing it. But at the same time, as you rightly said, it's not something that you can simply start. You can break something and build it. So it has to be a gradual process. So there are areas that we see which are most critical and which are high transaction, high TPS, and then we start actually re-architecturing those areas, and then obviously then start working on the rest. So I think that's a journey. But my guess is that in the next 4 to 5 years, I think the architecture of the bank, most of the banks will completely undergo a change. And if they don't undergo a change, it will be very difficult for them actually to compete in the competitive environment that will be there. Because see, today I don't think the competition for some of these products are only from banks. Right? Today the competition can be from anywhere. It could be a tech player, it could be a e-commerce player, it could be a payment player, it could be anybody. So unless you keep pace with it, you will lose out in that whole story. So I think broadly that's it.
Yeah, and Jaya, your views on the same point.
So, so the way I look at the way I, of course, to a large extent, what Vijit said is also valid. The other piece which I wanted to add in this entire in the discussion is that we actually, the word digital, if I can use, is very highly abused because everybody wants to become digital, but does everybody know what is digital is number one. So it's always essential for the stakeholders of an organization to actually get, they need to understand what this is going to give them when they deploy that. That understanding, if that concept, if that buy-in is there, then it's an easy flow into the system. Investment is a much later part of it. Investment comes into a much later phase. But most of the time, the struggle in most of the small organizations is to actually bring to the table as to what this is going to actually give them. For example, if you have to look at a simple APIs, if I have to integrate with a fintech player who actually will help me provide leads either in liabilities or in loans, the fact is that we would have either taken so much of time to actually put our people feet on street and source these leads, which would have otherwise been able to easily available because there's a fintech player who's already sourced a lot of these in the market, filters it based on our requirement and gives it to us. So this makes our life journey easy. We cut short a lot of steps and we actually are able to source these customers and get on with business. But the fact is that the benefits of this, or the fact that the internal stakeholders need to understand if the cost is going to be X, now I'll be Y. This is what is going to, I would have taken maybe 1 year to source these customers. I can source in the next 3 months. Actually, the need for us to internally understand how an API change, how the concept of API is going to help us move in leaps and bounds, and why this is internal is very critical. It's not because a CEO says everybody has to do, unless somebody actually internalizes this completely, and then what happens is then it's an easy flow into the system. People buy, it moves easily. There is no need for someone to really push this whole through in the system. projects of these kinds or the movement of these kinds is not because they don't fail because of capital, because of the expenditure that we have to incur in capital. That most of the organizations know, yes, we have to move into this field, we have to invest XYZ amount. That's all there. It's basically the internal stakeholders buying to move this becomes your biggest challenge, and that's where most of the time, the most of the the strength, the energy, the stamina, everything actually gets into getting them to accept that what is in it for them. So that's where I would actually talk about the small banks or the other banks who are not in the race and who are trying to do. These are some of the challenges that they face internally, because most of the time the issue is if you do it.
If I may ask, Jaya, but at the same point of time, and I mean, while I understand every organization would have a lot of challenges, but like I was discussing with Vijay, that being a large bank, they have a lot of challenges of legacy and existing technology. So, do you think at least the smaller banks or some of the new entrants, like you said in the fray, which is small finance banks and many other banks, or say for example the neo banks which are entering today, they did not have to deal with all of these legacy and a lot of related challenges which probably larger established players would have to deal with?
The legacy, if you look at the legacy systems are much lesser than what a large bank would experience, because they wouldn't have too much of legacy systems. The legacy systems typically are in large banks. The challenges which the small banks actually faces the internal management of the resources to understand how this particular the change of APS is going to make a change in the way business is conducted. So typically investments or typically the legacy systems are much lesser of a challenge than internalizing among the stakeholders. That's where the challenge is. So that's what I have missed.
I think the other challenge that also, along with this, that probably is related is, at least in some of the organizations, is how do you attract the right talent? Because if you actually don't attract the right talent for technology, it is sometimes you can get the entire architecture wrong, or you can get the solutioning wrong. So I think that's a big challenge for some of the organizations to ensure that you get the right set of people, and therefore you understand the subject matter well, and therefore put the right architecture, and therefore choose the right partner. Because all of these things have to fall into place. And if you make one mistake, the problem is that at times you have to live with that mistake, or the cost of replacement of that mistake is very, very high.
Yeah.
And also the time is very high.
You touched upon, so we started with customer, and then we spoke about technology, and I actually wanted to come to talent, and I'm glad you brought that up. And like you said, there is a part of attracting new talent, but the fact is there is tons of expertise which lies in organizations like yours, especially at the leadership and middle management layers, where there is very rich domain and functional and product expertise, regulatory knowledge which lies. So now obviously as banks are going through these transformation, it is not that banks can completely rehire the entire workforce, right? You have to build on the existing expertise and the existing experience. Now it'll be good to hear again, Jaya, from you as to what are banks doing to build on this knowledge which lies in the organization, or which experienced professionals bring in, but then layer it on top with more modern and digital skills, and more importantly understanding of how their functional knowledge or product knowledge have to now be used and multiplied in the digital environment.
So, Bimal, the most of the organizations actually are, okay. Let me just put it in this two parts. Smaller organizations, newer organizations are definitely able to bring in talent. Okay, they bring in talent, and they actually also enable the internal resources in terms of skilling, in terms of enabling, giving the requisite training, bringing in the modern technology, investing in heavily in the different systems. They do all of it. Okay, but I mean, I think I go back to the same point, that if you actually do not have a person who buys into this, okay, or your stakeholders or your business, that the people, the technology, everything being right, you will not be able to deliver it. So it's, while we talk about talent acquisition, we talk about the right talent, we bring in the knowledge from the market. All that is fine. I think one of the serious requirements today is not just the technology team. It's the training to the internal stakeholders who need to understand what is this, because it's just not the CEO wanting to do it, and it's not the technology team that is wanting to do it will make it happen. It is actually the stakeholders in the system who need to build this completely to make it happen. So when we talk about talent acquisition, it actually has to have a lot of it actually builds in a lot of these kind of parameters where the training to the people in the system, people need to understand what it is all about, and that's very, very critical. And that's where I have seen most of the challenges. You have the best of the talent in the organization, you have the best of the technology, but if your internal stakeholders are not bought into it, they don't understand what it is, they don't understand the what is going to bring to the organization, is going to be a big failure. And therefore, when we talk about talent and we talk about building the entire talent sphere in the organization, I think it's a top-down complete approach which has to cover all spheres of people in the organization, and that's the way I see it.
No, and Vijit, let me bring you in on the aspect of, like Jaya said, that one, it has to be top down, and secondly, the internal stakeholder has to buy in. Especially, and especially again, like I said, it's the middle management where you have a lot of expertise which lie in terms of domain, functional, and product knowledge. So again, how are you balancing the fact that you have to ensure you have to leverage the knowledge, but you have to also ensure that these people buy in, and hence the overall journey of the organization is accelerated?
Okay, so I have a slightly different view on this. First and foremost, yeah, there's no doubt top management has to have a buy-in. Otherwise, obviously none of these digital initiatives will run. For a minute, I'm assuming that in today's time and age, I think that's given, because I don't think anybody is questioning whether digital is required or not. I think that's a given. But I think the way we are approaching it is slightly different. Who actually needs to understand technology up to a particular point of time for actually building these products? And in our mind, it is basically the product team who actually think product and who think journeys. And it should therefore they should have a good amount of understanding and appreciation of what's happening in the digital world, in the technology world. But if you look at the entire set of other people who are actually the users of the technology, I think our endeavor is to try and see as to how can it be so intuitive that actually you don't need to train. And I don't think any one of us has been trained to use any of the apps, right? But we know exactly how to use it because it's so intuitive. So the question is that whether it is consumer facing or whether it's an internal customer facing, in the sense that it is an employee at the front end, it could be a branch, it could be at the sales team, etc., etc. Are those solutions that you're building so intuitive that actually he knows exactly how to use it and you don't need to train, or he doesn't need to appreciate anything? The minute we say that he needs to appreciate, which means that it's a convoluted process, and that's the way we are approaching it. So therefore, I think we break this into two parts. Whoever are building journeys and building products, I think should have a good understanding as to what they can do. And as far as anybody who is a user of it, if there is no usage, our going in position is that probably we got the journey wrong, we got the product wrong, and therefore we probably need to go back to the design table to figure out as to what needs to be done. So I think that's the way we are segregating, because it's not necessary that everybody needs to have the same talent, because obviously somebody who is at the front end and relationship management, we're expecting that he will spend time as far as possible to ensure that he builds that relationship, but he should be duly enabled with the digital solutions that we can give him. I think that's the way it is. We are trying to approach it.
Sure, super. I think that's a great note, Priya, for us to take some questions from the audience in case there are any questions. But we would like to open the house now for audience to ask questions. And Jaya, how will the questions come? Will they come via chat and somebody will read for the panelists?
Yeah, participants are free to type their questions in chat, or you could unmute yourself and ask. It's open for everyone to ask questions now. Do any of the participants have any questions?
I just wanted to ask one question. And I take a more of a from a tech side perspective of that. So if I see from a tech perspective, any tech asset needs to be managed. Once it gets certain volume and velocity, be it hardware assets, be it software assets, initially whenever any adoption happens, then you needing to manage it. And so now that APIs are gaining velocity, so there's so many of APIs, as I heard, are being used today. They are being created for newer and newer use cases, and obviously some of the older ones will face technology obsolescence, or maybe even the business case obsolescence, and may need to be retired. So how are we looking at managing APIs as tech assets? Is there any strategy we are already following, or that will happen maybe after some more traction happens?
I'll take that. So I guess at the end of the day, and there will be many APIs which may be relevant today, which may not be the use case that will be there, or probably those solutions may not even exist. So I think the technology obsolescence from that perspective is more from a development perspective, where then at the end of the day, API is pointing to either some hardware somewhere and some server somewhere, right? So from that perspective, it is actually managing APIs from that perspective is much more easier, because of the fact that it's at the end of the day that you would have spent some amount of time to develop an API, but if that API changes, you just trash that API and actually make a fresh one. And some of the APIs, the way these APIs are being made is also undergoing change. There are also solutions today where you can actually start coding by just doing drag and drop. So I think there are all of these solutions that are coming. Some of the APIs can be reused by just changing some of the parameters in the particular API. So I think from that perspective, I don't think it is as difficult as managing actually the hardware cost of technology, or certain software cost of technology when it becomes obsolete, or when there is a complete version change. I think from that perspective, I think it is still a lesser problem today. And anyway, we are in the very nascent stage. By the time some of these things come up, we don't know whether it will throw up any other challenges. But as on date, I don't see that to be a major, either challenge problem or a cost problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Ruchi, do we have any other questions coming in?
Yeah, we see a question on the chat window. The question is, how can we ease customer mindset towards adopting digital transformation? Jaya, would you like to take?
Yeah, I'll take that. See, the one thing that we actually spoke about when we talk about a customer journey, or when we drop a customer journey, we always keep in mind how easy it is for the customer to use it. So in fact, as recent as now, there are apps which has come out where the customer can actually speak and actually get the get to do his transaction. He doesn't necessarily need to type in. So it's as easy as through an audio he can actually get his get to know his balances, get to do his transaction, get to know what his last 5 statements were has happened. So there is so whenever we do a journey for a customer, we actually look at how easy it is for the customer. What is the segment of customers that we're going to with this particular particular application? Will he be able? Is he literate? Will he be able to use it? Will he be is he capable of doing it? And these are some of the stuff that actually actually keep in mind when we do a customer journey. So that actually leads to the fact that we make it easier for the customer to enable him to use it. So largely, and most of us have now realized that it's very, very critical for us to understand who our user is, who's going to use the app, and what the success of the the application is going to be. And that being the case, when we make it easier for the customer to use it, he actually gets adopted to this journey quite easily. That's where most of the organizations are now focusing on in terms of ease of use for the customer.
Thanks, Jaya. Vidya, I hope that answers your question. Thanks. We have one more question. One challenge we see is that customers still have very obsolete process designs and transformation doesn't fit into the current layout. How can they be convinced from complete re-engineering?
Okay, I'll take that. So I think if yeah, sorry, I'm a little radical on this answer, but I'm saying if somebody needs to be convinced that he needs to re-engineer an obsolete process, I don't think that that entity will exist, right? Because I mean, they will see it in their business numbers, they will see it in the customer satisfaction scores, they will see it in all of those things by stating that it's not working. So I guess that is a good enough trigger. In spite of that, that is not happening. Then I think the senior management probably should actually look at it a little bit more closely to figure out as to what's happening and whether they really need to do something. By creating a separate focus team to try and see as to how do you actually bring about digital transformation within the organization if it is not getting imbibed in the culture of the organization. Then you obviously need to actually do different training programs. You need to probably understand as to what are the challenges that are there, because it could be a cultural challenge, it could be a sheer availability of technology challenge, it could be a talent challenge in the sense that there's nobody to drive that change. So it could be a combination of all of these. But I think in today's time and age, it's very, very soon. I mean, you get to know very quickly as to whether the customer actually understands and likes your journey or he doesn't like your journey, because if you have users, you will actually figure out very quickly as to whether there is adoption happening.
And just to add this, most of your cases, when they drop out of the journey, you will actually understand that your dropouts actually are the reason why your journey is, people are not liking your journey. So that's one of the metrics that normally banks keep track of.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jiten, Jaya, there are great questions coming from the participants. There's one more. There are great number of APIs, credit card, doorstep banking, etc. Which API integration have been the most challenging and why?
So I have not done credit cards, but so therefore I leave Bijit to answer that. But I can definitely talk about, but I wouldn't talk about that as a challenge because I think that was the doorstep banking. Great. I think doorstep banking has been there from years ago. I mean, in terms of its physical mode, and then it moved to a digital path. And just the way I said a few minutes back in this call, with respect to the cash collection process, where one could never think about a cash collection beyond a branch and beyond a cash collection agencies. The path has now moved to customers, enabling customers to drop cash at cash collection points. So the API integration between the collection points to the banking platform is a big path breaker as far as the API integration is concerned. Would you call it as has there been a great challenge? Yes, it is a challenge because you have the other side of yours has a technology which you need to understand. You have your banking technology. You need to make sure that your the risk is absolutely taken care of. So you have those challenges. But if you ask between a credit and doorstep banking, I think they're two separate, and I think they remain separate. I mean, Bijit can add to that.
Yeah, so I think if you ask me, the biggest challenge that we faced was actually when we build APIs for our open banking, or when I call it the connected banking. Because it actually it was challenged on all fronts. First and foremost, we had to challenge our own mindset as to because there was this whole debate: why should you allow banking to happen from some other site? So just to give you a quick thing, connected banking is nothing but on an accounting software You can actually log into, you can choose which are the invoices that you want to pay. You can log into your bank account and you can just make a payment from that particular accounting software. You don't need to come to the bank site. Right? So the first question is, what is this big use case? Why do you even want to do it? The second challenge that we faced was from a sheer, security perspective. Whether it is safe enough, will there be misuse, will all of these things happen? The third one was, from a sheer technology challenge, in the sense that it had to hit so many systems, because the minute it is a current account, or it's an account, there are so many checks that need to be done before a transaction can get passed, and it goes and hits so many systems. It could be AML, it could be workflows, because you would have put certain limits on transactions. You will have to, sometimes it could be OD account. There are so many checks and so many places that you actually need to go and check. And then finally, you had this whole challenge on as to how do you actually draw this the entire flow. What is the sort of architecture that you should have for the customer journey? So I think, if you ask me, that was among the most difficult ones. But the brilliant thing is that, when you solve some of these most difficult ones, actually you actually suddenly open up a completely new avenue for business. So today, because of the fact that we had the journey, we have integrated with close to 40 such accounting softwares where you can actually open a bank account and you can start doing transactions there. We created a full-fledged digital channel financing program, which has been running very, very successfully with some of the top corporates, because we were able to, actually integrate this whole solution. So you asked me, that was the most difficult one. Yeah, not all. While API sounds very simple, getting some of these journeys done are not so simple.
Thank you. We'll take one last question.
Internal buy-ins, Vijit, like you said, I think getting the internal buy-ins itself becomes a challenge many years. Yeah. Ruchi, are we?
Yeah, we're on top of the hour. Just one last question. And if participants have more questions, please send to us. We'll make sure they get addressed. Jayashree, I'm not sure if I will be able to justify, but let me ask it this way. UPI is successful, but is safety promissory, since KYC asks for access to some key details like OTP and card details, and often discourage users. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, you want to take the shot on the question from Jayesh?
Yeah, I'm just reading that question over here. That's the reason I'm just taking time.
Sure.
Okay, so just to answer the question short, Jayashree. See, UPI, when you talk about these are all UPI is a payment machinery which has been created by the National Payment Corporation of India. So the fact that the details are being sought and it's getting validated by the OTP also are under a very well-fenced machinery which has been created by the system. So I see it we always feel that every step that we do is is difficult. Can we make it more easier? But according to me, I think the need for us to make sure that these are critical regulatory steps to critical risk steps to be mitigated, and make sure that the payment is is done by the person concerned doing, is why all these steps are put in place. According to me, and from what we have gone through in the last few years after the UPI got launched, while we had our own challenges as banking institutions to handle them and our customers, I think it's kind of matured well over the last 3-4 years. And according to the data also, you rarely hear about any frauds that have happened through the UPI channels. So that's what I would look at answering your question, unless and until Vijit wants to add in there.
Yeah, so I'll just add two things there. So first and foremost, you should understand that none of these card details are being captured by any of the intermediaries, right? It is all happening and authenticated at the bank and through NPCI. The second thing, as far as what you mentioned about reading OTP, that is for you to decide. You can always disable it. It's not a requirement that is told that it's not a UPI product, right? It's an app related use case. So if you have some app which reads your messages, you just need to go and disable access to reading your messages. I guess that will stop it.
Good.
So
Ruchi,
I think there is absolutely no reason for you to worry that UPI is not safe, so long as you don't share any of your data with somebody.
That's critical. That's right.
Thank you so
Ruchi,
much.
offline now.
Questions coming, but apologize. We will take a note of those and reach out to you to answer them separately. And we would like to thank both Bijit and Jaya. Thanks a lot for very insightful session. All of us got to learn a lot from this discussion. Thanks for your time. Bimal, would you like to say any closing?
No, thanks, Jaya, Bijit. I mean, really, I think very, very rich conversation. So thanks a lot for sharing a lot of your experience. Of course, very, very rich experience, and as it comes through. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to more such interactions.
Thanks, Bimal, for the opportunity. I think all these sessions only enhance our understanding of what we have been doing all these years. So it just helps a lot. Thank you so much, Bijit, for being a co-participant.
Thank you all very much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ruchi. Thank you, Vishnupriya. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaya. Thank you. Thanks, Bimal. It was a wonderful session. Thank you all. Thanks to the audience. Thank you.
Okay, guys. Bye. Thanks.